She thought she'd left that London secret behind until one missing woman dragged it back into the light. This is Agatha Raisin and the secret she buried in London. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. Carsely woke to a bright but chilly Saturday morning, the sort of crisp light that made the Honeystone cottages look as though they had been freshly polished overnight. Agatha Raisin, however, was not feeling polished. She sat at her kitchen table glowering at the remains of her latest culinary humiliation, a lemon drizzle cake that had been described at yesterday's WI coffee morning as ambitious. Even now the word gave her indigestion. It had been said kindly, of course, which only made it worse. Kindness always struck Agatha as a veiled insult, like adding a doily under a disaster. She stabbed a fork into the cake. It resisted. Most things did. Hodge padded into the kitchen, tail high, fur immaculate, and gave her the faintly censorious look he reserved for moments when she was obviously making a fuss. He sniffed the cake, recoiled, and sauntered to his bowl with the weary air of a creature who had long accepted that humans were beyond saving. "Don't judge me," Agatha muttered. "Everyone's a critic." The clatter of the letterbox made her jump. Saturday Post rarely brought anything pleasant. Bills, charity pleas, and the occasional glossy catalogue reminding her that other women her age had embraced sensible cardigans and modest expectations. Agatha prided herself on rejecting both. She swept into the hall. On the floor lay a thick envelope, gleaming like a smug little trophy. She tore it open with a nail she'd recently convinced herself was too short, but was grateful for now. Inside was an invitation printed on heavy cream cardstock. Saskia Trent. Presents Celebrating London's Finest Women in PR. Black tie. Champagne reception. Media presence. Silent auction. Rubbing salt into old wounds optional. Agatha felt her stomach drop. Saskia Trent. Of all the names to come slithering back from her London past, Saskia's was the one she least wished to see printed in elegant serif font. Agatha's old rival had possessed a talent for backhanded compliments and front-handed sabotage. The two of them had fought ferociously in the PR trenches of the 1990s, claws sharpened by ambition and cheap office coffee. Celebrating finest women in PR, Agatha read aloud. Meaning herself, obviously, and perhaps a dig or two for the rest of us. She frowned. And what's that supposed to mean? Finest? I'm still perfectly fine. Hodge, having eaten his breakfast, wandered back into the hall, caught sight of the invitation, sniffed it in disgust, and stalked away. A prophetic gesture, if ever there was one. A gentle knock sounded at the front door, the sort of soft, apologetic tap only one woman in Carsely would make. Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife, stood on the doorstep wrapped in a light coat, her eyes radiating sympathy before Agatha even spoke. "Oh dear," Mrs. Bloxby murmured, as Agatha brandished the invitation like a piece of forensic evidence. "Is that from her?" "Yes," Agatha snapped. "Saskia Trent, Queen of Smug. She's hosting some ridiculous gala in London, wants to celebrate women in PR, meaning she wants to show off and make me miserable." Mrs. Bloxby stepped inside, a small thermos in hand. "I brought some of my spiced tea. I thought you might need it after yesterday's, well, cake." "You and half the village," Agatha grumbled, but the warmth of the tea worked its way through her irritation. They sat in the front room, where weak winter sunshine tried its best through the lace curtains. Mrs. Bloxby listened while Agatha explained Saskia's history, the petty feuds, the grandstanding, and, carefully avoided, the one humiliating incident from decades ago. Even now, Agatha felt her cheeks heat at the memory. That part of her life was boxed up, sealed, and buried with hopes it would stay buried. "You don't have to go," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "I do," Agatha said at once. "If I don't show up, she'll crow that I'm too ashamed or too old or too rural. Probably all three." "Sometimes avoiding a battle is wisdom, not defeat." "That sounds like something from one of your sermons," Agatha retorted. "I'd rather commit social mayhem than wisdom." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "I know." They were interrupted by the buzz of the phone. Agatha snatched it up, assuming it was Roy Silver. She had told him about the WI cake debacle, and he had threatened to stage an intervention involving London patisseries. But it was Doris Simpson, her cleaner, breathlessly triumphant. "Agatha, I've just heard the most delicious gossip. That woman who sent you the invitation, her firm is going under. They say she's desperate for attention. Probably why she's throwing that fancy party. Poor thing." Agatha rolled her eyes. Doris's gossip was usually inspired but rarely accurate. "Thank you, Doris," she said dryly, "but I doubt Saskia Trent is desperate for anything except causing trouble." She hung up. Mrs. Bloxby's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Do you think it might be true?" "Doris once claimed the Red Lion was being bought by Madonna," Agatha reminded her. "So no." Still, the mention lingered in her mind like a stray thorn. Why revive an old rivalry now? Why send her the invitation so pointedly? The uncertainty prickled. Saskia had titled the evening as something grand and honourable, but Saskia never did anything honourably. Agatha sensed a trap. After Mrs. Bloxby left, Agatha paced the cottage, the invitation clutched in her hand, muttering darkly. Hodge trailed her for a while before giving up and curling into a cinnamon roll on the sofa. She drifted into her bedroom and examined herself in the mirror. Lines at the mouth, a touch of puffiness under the eyes. A stranger might see a confident middle-aged businesswoman, but Agatha saw every betrayal of time. She tugged at her hair with annoyance. "No," she declared. "If I'm going looking fabulous." She marched to the phone and dialed her hairdresser in Evesham. The receptionist answered with her usual chirpy optimism. "Good morning. Trim or full glamour?" "Full glamour," Agatha said. "War-level glamour." She booked the earliest appointment and hung up, feeling slightly better. A transformation was always soothing. She stared again at the invitation lying on the dressing table, the script looping elegantly as though mocking her. "Bury the past where it belongs," she muttered. "That's exactly what I'll do." But the past, as she would soon discover, had claws sharper than hers. She returned to the kitchen, tidied the tragic cake into the bin, and stood by the window, watching a streak of pale sunlight turn the village green into a postcard scene. Carsely looked warm and safe, the sort of place where nothing nasty could possibly happen, unless Agatha Raisin was involved, in which case all bets were off. Her gaze drifted again to the invitation. Saskia Trent, celebrating London's finest women in PR, a provocation, a challenge, a threat wrapped in chiffon. The longer Agatha stared, the more she felt old anxieties creep in, the sort that whispered about the one mistake she'd never forgiven herself for, the one secret she'd never told a single person. Not even Mrs. Bloxby, certainly not Charles. And Roy, well, Roy would broadcast it through London by tea time. Agatha straightened her shoulders. If Saskia wanted a confrontation, she'd get it. But Agatha would be ready this time. She'd walk into that gala with perfect hair, immaculate makeup, a brand new dress, and enough defiance to power the national grid. She poured herself a small glass of wine, just one, and took a measured sip. Not for nerves, she told herself, for strategy. Hodge jumped onto the counter, eyeing her drink with disdain. Agatha scratched behind his ears. "You're right," she said softly. "This is a terrible idea." But terrible ideas had never stopped Agatha Raisin. As dusk began to settle, she placed the invitation neatly under a fridge magnet, shaped like a sardonic-looking cat. It felt like fate mocking her, or perhaps preparing her. Either way, she was going. And somewhere in London, Saskia Trent was probably smiling to herself, certain Agatha would take the bait. Agatha, smoothing her skirt and lifting her chin, muttered, "Well, let her smile. She won't be smiling for long." Hodge stretched luxuriously and flicked his tail, as if he already suspected just how wrong she was. London glittered with its usual self-importance as Agatha Raisin stepped out of the taxi, one heel sinking annoyingly into a gap between the paving stones. The converted warehouse before her pulsed with light, strings of fairy bulbs, artful uplighting, and the faint shimmer of expensive perfume drifting out with every opening of the door. It was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel underdressed and overdrawn. Agatha, however, had spent a small fortune on looking magnificent and refused to be intimidated by a building. Roy Silver emerged beside her in a flash of orange satin that made a passing couple shield their eyes. "Darling, we look fabulous," he declared. "Well, I do. You look like someone trying very hard not to show nerves." "I am not nervous," Agatha snapped. "I'm cold, and this pavement is designed by enemies." They swept inside, greeted by a wash of warm air and a clatter of fashionable laughter. The gala space was all polished concrete and hanging drapes, the sort of urban chic Agatha had once pretended to adore in her London days. Now, coming from Carsely mud and sensible rubber soles, the affectation grated. The people drifted about like painted dolls, each one convinced of their importance. Agatha braced herself, and there she was, Saskia Trent, glowing in silver silk, smiling at Agatha with the triumphant satisfaction of a cat that had finally cornered the fattest mouse in the field. "Agatha Raisin," Saskia purred, sweeping forward with arms that suggested a hug, but stopped mercifully short. "How marvellous you could join us. I wasn't sure you'd brave the journey from, where is it? Carsey? Carling?" "Carsely," Agatha corrected, holding her head high, "and I manage travel surprisingly well for my age. I haven't crumbled yet." "No, dear," Saskia said sweetly. "Not entirely." Roy muttered something under his breath that sounded like witch, but in a tone meant for supporting Agatha rather than insulting spellcasters. Saskia led them further inside, with Agatha forced to endure a barrage of thinly veiled insults, comments on aging, remarks about failed romances, a sly reference to that unfortunate incident from Agatha's PR past. Each barb landed lightly in public but pressed like a fingertip bruise on Agatha's pride. She responded with brittle charm and the occasional blistering remark that made Roy beam. Guests whispered behind manicured hands as Agatha passed. She heard her name float through the air, usually accompanied by a pitying sound. She reached the bar and requested a gin with the voice of a woman who would brook no nonsense. Holding the glass, she felt her confidence settle, just enough to keep going. The evening unfolded in glittering waves. There were speeches from minor celebrities, toasts from self-congratulatory executives, and a silent auction featuring holidays in Tuscany and a signed photograph of Saskia posing in front of St. Paul's. Agatha eyed it, and considered bidding just to draw a moustache on it later. A waiter passed with champagne flutes. Agatha took one, more for show than thirst. She felt Saskia's eyes glide across the room, checking her reactions like a scientist observing a specimen. The old rivalry stirred with embarrassing familiarity. Years had passed, yet Agatha still felt like that ambitious PR woman clawing for recognition, while Saskia smiled serenely from a higher rung. Roy kept up a stream of commentary to distract her. "That woman's dress is a tax crime. And look, is that not the most tragic fringe you've ever seen?" He clung to Agatha's arm with theatrical devotion, yet the anxiety built beneath her bravado. More than once she caught sight of guests whispering with knowing expressions. Her heart gave a nervous kick. Did Saskia plan something? Had word of her long-buried humiliation somehow spread? Then the lights dimmed. Saskia stepped onto the small stage with the grace of a queen claiming her throne. The room quietened. She held a microphone lightly, as though the world waited breathlessly for her next triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as polished stone, "thank you for joining us to celebrate London's most influential women in public relations. Tonight, I have a special treat, an exclusive exposé." She paused as the room leaned in. A story of lost legends and buried sins. Agatha felt cold prickles at the back of her neck. Roy squeezed her hand in alarm. "What on earth is she talking about?" he whispered. Agatha swallowed. She could guess. Saskia continued, "Tonight I will reveal—" She never finished the sentence. Saskia staggered. Her silver dress rippled. The microphone gave a sharp burst of feedback. Then, with a strange, choked sound, she collapsed beside the glittering podium. The champagne flute in her hand shattered against the floor. The room erupted. Guests shrieked and stepped back as though the floor had turned toxic. One woman dropped her handbag and made a dramatic grab at her pearls. Roy gave a high, startled squeak and fainted backwards onto a cushioned bench, managing it with surprising elegance. Agatha stood closest. She stared down at Saskia's crumpled form, horror rising through her. For one dreadful moment, the noise of the gala blurred into a dull hum. Saskia's face had gone an awful grey, and her fingers twitched as though grasping for something already out of reach. "Someone call an ambulance!" Agatha shouted. People scrambled. A few guests knelt to assist, while others took the opportunity to hover dramatically near the bar. The panic had its own choreography, performed with expensive shoes. Agatha crouched beside Saskia despite a sudden wish to flee. Whatever had happened, collapse, faint, or something darker, Agatha knew she had somehow been pulled into the centre of it. The sensation was sickeningly familiar, as though fate had circled back to bite her again. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, pushing through the crowd, their brisk voices restoring some sense of order. They lifted Saskia carefully onto a stretcher. Agatha watched with a complicated swirl of emotions: shock, guilt, and an unwelcome flicker of pity. The crowd parted again as a late arrival stepped into the room, scanning the scene with the weary resignation of a man who had been summoned to far too many dramatic incidents involving the same person. "Of course you'd be here, Agatha," Bill Wong muttered as he approached, his expression a blend of exasperation and fondness. Agatha straightened. "I didn't do anything," she said quickly. "I hadn't asked," Bill replied, though his tone suggested he fully expected an answer sooner or later. "What happened?" "She collapsed," Agatha said, right in the middle of making a speech. Something about exposing sins. Bill arched an eyebrow. "Did she mention yours by name?" "Oh, don't you start." Emergency staff carried Saskia toward the exit. Roy recovered enough to clutch Agatha's arm and declare, "Darling, this night has gone from fabulous to fatal in under 10 minutes. Even I can't manage that kind of drama." Agatha felt her knees wobble. Bill steadied her arm with a supportive firmness. "I'll need a statement later," he said, "and no wandering off." "I never wander," Agatha snapped. "I stride." "Yes," Bill sighed. "Into trouble." Agatha watched the doors close behind Saskia's stretcher, her stomach tight. Whatever Saskia intended to reveal had been silenced, but not erased. A secret like that didn't vanish. Someone had wanted her quiet. Someone had acted, and Agatha, horribly, was once again at the centre. A thin Sunday light crept over Carsely, pale and fussy, as though the sky had woken with a headache. Agatha Raisin certainly had one. She sat at her kitchen table, head in her hands, hair in a state that suggested it had spent the night plotting rebellion. The previous evening's gala replayed itself in miserable flashes. Saskia's silver dress collapsing like a punctured balloon, the scream of the microphone, Roy fainting with the grace of an overacted opera scene, and Bill Wong looking at her with that familiar mixture of irritation and concern. Hodge leapt onto the table, tail flicking. He sniffed at the rim of Agatha's tea mug and gave her the look of a creature unimpressed by human fragility. "Don't start," she muttered. "I'm allowed one miserable morning." Carsely was unusually lively for a Sunday. Word of Saskia's dramatic collapse, suspected poisoning, according to a breathless caller on the village grapevine, had flown faster than a WI rumour about discounted scones. From the window, Agatha saw people walking past her cottage with expressions of shameless curiosity. She shut the curtain firmly. The last thing she needed was Doris Simpson appearing with a tray of sympathy biscuits and 90 intrusive questions. The doorbell rang anyway. Agatha trudged to the door and found Bill Wong, looking maddeningly fresh and far too alert for someone who had doubtless been awake half the night, handling a potential murder. He gave her a small smile. "Morning, Agatha. May I come in?" "If I say no, you'll do it anyway," she replied, stepping aside. Bill entered with the quiet tread of a polite cat burglar. He glanced around the cottage, taking in the faint aroma of burnt toast and the sight of Hodge perched like a furry sentinel. "You look tired," he said gently. "I am tired," Agatha snapped. "I had a traumatic evening watching a woman collapse and a man in orange satin faint into a curtain." Bill sat opposite her at the kitchen table and opened his notebook. His tone shifted to official, though the fondness remained underneath. "I need to ask you some questions. Routine, of course." "Nothing about this is routine," Agatha muttered. "Go on." "Why did Saskia invite you?" Bill asked. Agatha stiffened. "Professional courtesy," she said quickly. "Or spite. Take your pick." "Did you argue?" "No." A pause. "Not loudly." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Any history between you two? Old grudges? Career disputes?" "Don't be ridiculous," Agatha said, waving a dismissive hand. "Everyone in PR has history. It's a field built on grudges. And coffee. And lies occasionally." Bill tapped his pen lightly. "Did Saskia mention an exposé she planned to present?" Agatha's stomach twisted. She forced an airy tone. She mentioned something but keeled over before she could brag about it. Typical Saskia. Never finishes what she starts. "I see." Bill hesitated, then added, "She'd received threatening faxes over the past few weeks. Anonymous. We're still analyzing them." Agatha blinked. A shiver ran down her back. Faxes. The word felt embarrassingly close to her past, like a relic she'd hoped the world had thrown away. "Threatening faxes," she echoed. "Who sends faxes nowadays except dentists and men who still wear pagers?" "Exactly why it's interesting," Bill said. "Feels nostalgic." Agatha's palms grew damp. She picked up her mug to hide the tremble in her hand. "Have you considered jealous husbands? Saskia stole clients, male and female. I imagine a few marriages suffered." "You sound like Roy," Bill said with a faint smile. "He's convinced the culprit is a furious spouse." "Roy's theories are usually flamboyant and useless," Agatha said, "but occasionally amusing." Bill closed his notebook. "If you remember anything else, any conversations, tension, odd behavior, call me." He rose. "And Agatha, please stay out of this." "That's insulting," she said. "I never interfere." Bill gave her a look that suggested he could recite a list of contrary examples. "Just be careful." After he left, Agatha stood in the quiet kitchen, feeling the old dread curling in her chest. Saskia's exposé, the threatening faxes. Why had Saskia targeted her again after all these years? And that final unfinished speech, lost legends and buried sins. It sounded like Saskia had been ready to drag her skeletons out of their London cupboard. She chewed anxiously on a cigarette filter, though she resisted lighting it. Her nerves prickled. A knock sounded at the back door. She flinched, then opened it to find Charles Fraith leaning against the frame with the smug leisure of a man who had just slept 9 perfect hours. "You look dreadful," he observed cheerfully. "You look pointless," Agatha retorted. "What do you want?" "I heard your glamorous evening ended with a collapse and a fainting, Roy," Charles said. "Naturally, I came to offer my assistance." "You don't even know what happened." "No," Charles admitted, stepping inside, "but I hate missing drama, and I know the look of a woman facing a problem she won't admit she has." Agatha scowled. "Bill thinks Saskia was poisoned, and that someone sent her threatening faxes." "How wonderfully retro," Charles said. "You don't see many good old-fashioned threats these days. Everything's too digital." Agatha ignored him. Her mind churned. Why invite me to a gala only to drop dead halfway through? Or nearly dead? Why make cryptic speeches? Why? "Maybe she wanted to boast," Charles interrupted. "Or show you up. Or maybe she simply wanted you there as an audience." "Audience to what?" Agatha demanded. Charles gave her a lazy shrug. "You tell me." She opened her mouth, ready to snap a reply, but stopped. The truth hovered dangerously close. Her humiliating London incident, the one she'd caged in mental darkness, felt suddenly alive again, pacing restlessly, waiting for the chance to escape. "I don't know," she said stiffly, "and I won't speculate without proof." Charles eyed her shrewdly. "You're hiding something." "No, I'm not." "Fine," he said. "Then I shall help for entertainment. Investigation is far more enjoyable than sorting estate paperwork." He reached for her kettle and switched it on as if he lived there. Agatha let him. His lazy charm was irritating but oddly comforting, like an expensive cushion that didn't match the sofa but was pleasant to lean on. As Charles talked about possible suspects, jealous rivals, scorned clients, deranged stylists, Agatha half listened. Her mind kept circling back to the faxes, threats typed on old paper, anonymous messages. It felt personal, too personal. After Charles left, promising to poke around London with aristocratic subtlety, Agatha tried to calm herself with housework. Hodge supervised from the armchair, his tail curled around him neatly. The domestic quiet should have soothed her. It didn't. Her cottage felt like a stage awaiting the next scene of a play she hadn't rehearsed for. By late afternoon, the village had absorbed the news completely. People passed her garden gate, lowering their voices dramatically. The Red Lion buzzed with speculation. Someone claimed Saskia had been poisoned with a rare berry from South America. Someone else insisted it was a love triangle gone wrong. Doris Simpson phoned to say she suspected a jealous female associate, which was Doris's solution to any crime involving lipstick. Agatha slammed down the receiver. Twilight settled, soft and smoky. She turned on a lamp and tried reading, but every rustle of paper made her flinch. When the doorbell rang, she nearly jumped out of her skin. No one stood outside, only a plain envelope on the mat, No stamp, no handwriting, just a thin slit where it had been slid quietly under the door. Agatha carried it to the kitchen with a sense of creeping dread. Hodge padded after her, ears twitching. She opened the envelope. Inside lay a photocopy of an old London tabloid clipping, yellowed, grainy, unmistakable. Her humiliating headline, her long-buried mistake, the scandal she had never confessed, circled in thick red ink. Agatha's breath caught. Someone wanted her frightened. Someone new. And the past she'd tried to bury had returned, eager to claw through the surface. Hodge jumped onto the counter and pressed against her arm, unusually gentle. Agatha stroked his fur mechanically, eyes fixed on the clipping. "Hell," she whispered. "It's starting again." Carsely woke to a crisp morning that pretended to be cheerful but wasn't fooling anyone who had slept poorly. Frost clung lightly to hedgerows, giving the village a sparkling edge that Agatha Raisin was in no mood to appreciate. She paced her kitchen with the footsteps of a woman pursued by doom. The photocopied tabloid clipping, yellowish, grainy, smelling faintly of old toner, lay on the table like evidence in a trial she hadn't agreed to. Hodge sat beside it, tail tucked neatly around himself, watching Agatha with the resigned expression of a cat who had long expected calamity from his human. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha snapped, though her voice wobbled. "It wasn't that bad. People have survived worse scandals." Hodge blinked at her in grave disagreement. Agatha pressed her palms to the table. The clipping told the story. Years ago, during her London PR days, she'd engineered a stunt meant to catapult a rising celebrity, Julian Hartwell, into the spotlight. Cameras were arranged, interviews lined up, and then it all went spectacularly wrong. The stunt had backfired, humiliating him on live television. The fallout had been brutal. Julian's career faltered, then vanished. Rumours blossomed, nervous breakdown, secret rehab, bankruptcy. Agatha had left London soon after, convinced her error had cost a man his future. And now the headline was back, encircled in red ink like a schoolteacher's condemnation. She sank into a chair. Her throat felt tight. Fear, embarrassment, guilt, all of it pressed down, as suffocating as cheap perfume. Someone had sent that clipping to frighten her. Someone who knew her past. The kettle clicked off. Hodge jumped down as if the noise offended his sensibilities. A knock came at the door. Soft, familiar. Mrs. Bloxby. Agatha hesitated, then opened it. The vicar's wife stood wrapped in a warm coat, her eyes full of quiet concern. "I thought I'd bring you some fresh bread," Mrs. Bloxby said. "You looked troubled yesterday." Agatha, torn between pride and the sudden need to confess, stepped aside. Mrs. Bloxby entered the kitchen and took in the scene, the clipping, Agatha's pale face, Hodge's tense stillness. "Oh dear," she murmured. "Would you like to tell me?" Agatha sat heavily. Something inside her cracked. "It's from my old life," she said, voice hoarse. "A PR stunt gone wrong. I humiliated a man. Not intentionally, but it happened. And now Saskia has dug it up." Mrs. Bloxby listened without judgment, her hands folded neatly. Agatha felt exposed, but oddly relieved. "You were younger then," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "People make mistakes in youth they wouldn't repeat later." "It wasn't that long ago," Agatha muttered, "and the man vanished from public life. Everyone said I'd destroyed him." Her fingers tightened. If Saskia was planning to reveal that, then hiding won't help, Mrs. Bloxby said kindly. "You must confront it. Secrets fester when kept in the dark." Agatha sighed, rubbing her temples. The comfort helped, but only a little. The thought of embarking on an investigation while her past clawed at her heels felt exhausting. Yet when Roy Silver telephoned, shrieking down the line that they must go back to London and demand answers, something like determination stirred in Agatha's chest. 10 minutes later, Roy arrived in a mint-green coat and a scarf that looked pilfered from a theatre wardrobe. Charles Frayth turned up as well, strolling in with the bored elegance of a man who hadn't yet found anything entertaining that day. "We are going to confront Saskia's minions," Roy announced. "I want righteous indignation before lunch." "I want information," Agatha said, "and I want it now." Charles smiled lazily. "I want coffee," he added, "but I suppose London can provide both." They drove toward London in Agatha's car, Roy prattling, Charles dozing, and Agatha gripping the wheel with grim focus. The city rose ahead, all steel and bustle, reminding her of who she'd been before Carsely softened her edges. Saskia's PR office occupied a sleek building filled with glass doors and overconfident young professionals. The receptionist blinked at Agatha's name, then pressed a buzzer that summoned Lila Moorcroft, Saskia's assistant. Lila appeared with the expression of a woman forced to interact with peasants. Her hair was scraped into a bun tight enough to restrict oxygen to the brain. She frowned down her nose at Agatha. "You," Lila said flatly. "Saskia warned me you might show up." "How delightful," Agatha replied. "I do try to brighten a room." Lila's lips tightened. "We're not giving out statements. The police have been here." "We're not here for gossip," Agatha said. "We need information, and you're going to give it to us." Charles lounged against the reception desk. "She means please," he murmured. Lila crossed her arms. "Saskia was working on something huge. She didn't tell me because she thought I'd ruin it. She always undervalued me, but I know she dug up your scandal." Her eyes glinted with spite. "She thought it would be delicious." Agatha's cheeks burned. Roy squeezed her arm with dramatic sympathy. "Did you send the threatening faxes?" Agatha demanded. "Some of them," Lila admitted with a shrug. "Only the earlier ones, to frighten Saskia. She never appreciated my loyalty. Her tone was disturbingly casual. But I didn't poison her. I'm cross, not homicidal." Roy gasped. "You admit to forgery?" Lila sighed impatiently. "It wasn't criminal forgery, it was emotional persuasion." "That's still forgery," Charles murmured, amused. "Why reopen my scandal?" Agatha asked sharply. "Why now?" Lila hesitated, then jerked her chin toward an office door. "Because Saskia found something new. Something about your vanished celebrity, Julian Hartwell. She requested archive files last week. She said she'd found a connection." Her voice dropped. She didn't seem scared. She seemed triumphant. Agatha's stomach dipped. "A connection to me?" "Possibly," Lila said. "Or someone close to you. She wouldn't say." "That makes no sense," Roy protested. "Unless—" "Don't guess," Agatha snapped. "We need facts." Lila's gaze flicked over them, unkind but frightened beneath the veneer. For all her bitterness, she hadn't poisoned Saskia. She was too transparent, too desperate for approval. Agatha asked a few more questions, but Lila had nothing else. As they turned to leave, Roy whispered, "She scares me, like a librarian who eats interns." "Focus," Agatha said. "Saskia reopened the scandal. She pulled archive files on Julian Hartwell. Why?" "Maybe she wanted revenge," Roy said. "Or a comeback," Charles suggested. "Or column inches. People kill for column inches these days." Agatha wasn't convinced. Something deeper lay beneath Saskia's behavior, something someone feared. They walked down the corridor toward the stairwell, the sound of office chatter fading behind them. The stairwell smelled faintly of bleach and old metal, the sort of institutional scent that belonged to every London building constructed after 1980. As they descended, Agatha felt a prickling at the back of her neck. She slowed. A shadow moved one floor below, too quick to place, too sharp to ignore. "Someone's there," she whispered. Roy clutched her arm. "Darling, if this is a murderer, I demand a stylish death pose." "Shut up," Agatha hissed. Charles leaned forward, peering down the stairwell. The shadow shifted again, a figure retreating swiftly to the ground floor, then gone. Agatha's pulse raced. Someone had followed them, listened, watched. "Well," Charles said lightly, though his eyes were sharper than usual. "That was unfriendly." Agatha stared down the empty stairwell. The echo of the retreating footsteps haunted the silence. Someone didn't want her digging. Someone feared what Saskia had discovered. And Agatha, heart-thumping, suspected the worst. This mystery wasn't about a scandal she'd buried. It was about something, or someone, Saskia had unearthed. A thin, drifting rain moved across Carsely the next morning, not enough to be dramatic, merely enough to make gossip cling to the air like damp laundry. Agatha stood at her front window, arms folded, watching the drizzle paint the lane a sombre grey. She loathed rain that couldn't commit. Either pour or clear off, she thought. This halfway nonsense only encouraged villagers to walk slower, stare longer, and speculate more. Hodge, perched on the windowsill, flicked his tail as though agreeing. Agatha turned away sharply. She had no patience for drizzle or for neighbours craning their necks to see if she was still alive after the London gala fiasco. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the stairwell shadow, Lila's bitterness, and the revived tabloid sting. The day ahead promised irritation wrapped in mystery. She was halfway through a piece of toast she didn't want when the knock came. Bill Wong stood on her doorstep in a neat raincoat, droplets clinging to his hair. His expression was the same as always, calm, steady, faintly amused, but with a weariness reserved exclusively for Agatha Raisin. "Let me guess," she said. "You're here to tell me to stay out of it." "You never stay out of anything," Bill said, stepping inside. "So I thought I'd tell you what I can before you run around inventing answers." "Inventing? I am an investigator, practically a professional." "You're a professional complicator," Bill corrected. "But sit down, please." Agatha bristled but obeyed. She noticed Bill's glance at the remains of toast, then at Hodge, who stretched luxuriously as though receiving a visitor was a high service. Bill opened a folder with the careful hands of someone accustomed to paper rather than screens. "We have preliminary toxicology," he said. "The substance used was a rare stimulant, quite potent in the wrong dose. It was popular in the 1990s nightclub scene." Agatha stared. "Nightclub scene?" Bill nodded. "Your celebrity, Julian Hartwell, came from that world, didn't he?" Her stomach tightened. "That's coincidence." "Perhaps," Bill said gently, "but coincidence tends to follow you." Before she could retort, Bill explained the rest. A security guard at the gala saw Saskia arguing with a well-dressed man in sunglasses. Early evening. He thinks it might have been Julian, but he wasn't certain. Agatha felt her pulse kick. Julian was there. Why? "We don't know yet," Bill said, "if it was him." "Or," Agatha said slowly, "someone who wanted to look like him." Bill shut the folder. "Please don't start imagining conspiracies. We have enough trouble." "You underestimate my imagination," Agatha replied coolly. Bill sighed. "Agatha, be careful. Whoever sent you that clipping is escalating, and I mean it. Stay where I can find you." She nearly snapped back, but Bill's concern softened her irritation, just slightly. After he left, Agatha stood at the window again, thinking. Rain misted the glass. Somewhere in London, Saskia lay in hospital fighting for her life. Someone had poisoned her, and someone had sent Agatha a warning. Julian Hartwell lingered on the edge of the story like a ghost refusing to stay buried. She didn't have long to brood. The doorbell jangled violently some minutes later. Colin Trent barged in uninvited, a tall, poofy-haired man wearing a coat too expensive for his temperament. Saskia's ex-husband radiated theatrical misery and self-importance. "I assume you know who I am," he declared before Agatha could speak. "I do," Agatha said, "but I try not to." Colin ignored this. He flung himself into an armchair with the grace of a sack of potatoes dressed in cashmere. "Those investments she mocked," Colin snapped. "If she exposed how they started, I'd be finished." "She destroyed me, you know. Saskia ruined my reputation, my finances, my peace of mind." "Fascinating," Agatha said, arms crossed. "I know all about her secrets. And yours, Raisin." He jabbed a finger at her. "Don't think your past isn't known. People talk, documents resurface, the press remembers." Agatha kept her expression neutral, though her pulse thudded. "Do enlighten me, Mr. Trent." "I could," he boasted, "but I won't. Not yet." His attempt at mystery was so pathetic it almost cheered her. "If you know so much," she said sweetly, "why don't you tell the police? They adore dramatic men." Colin faltered. "Well, maybe I will. Maybe I already have." He hadn't, of course, but he enjoyed imagining himself vital. After a few more pompous declarations, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard Hodge leapt off the windowsill in disgust. Agatha muttered, "That man couldn't destroy a sandwich without help." But the encounter left her uneasy. He had puffed himself up like a peacock, yet his eagerness to claim knowledge, any knowledge, was unsettling. Later that morning, Agatha walked to the vicarage. The drizzle had lightened, leaving the air fresh and smelling faintly of wet earth. Mrs. Bloxby answered the door with a warm smile and ushered her into the cosy kitchen, where the faint scent of cinnamon drifted from the oven. "You look troubled," Mrs. Bloxby said, pouring tea. "I am troubled," Agatha admitted. She recounted Bill's update. Colin's theatrics, and the nightclub poison. The whole thing feels tangled, and I hate feeling tangled. Mrs. Bloxby handed her a warm scone. Sometimes motives aren't about revenge, she said gently. Sometimes they're about desperation. Agatha frowned. Desperation? People cling to their reputations, Mrs. Bloxby said, their livelihoods, even their illusions. When someone threatens the version of themselves they want the world to see, they panic. Agatha absorbed this. She rarely admitted it aloud, but Mrs. Bloxby's quiet clarity had a way of straightening the knots in her mind. "Thank you," Agatha murmured, surprising herself. She left the vicarage feeling steadier, though not for long. Roy Silver telephoned the moment she reached home. "Agatha, darling, you will not believe what I've found," he shrieked. "If it's another neon jacket, I swear." "No, listen. I went through Saskia's desk with one of the junior assistants. Don't ask how I convinced him. And guess what she wrote on next week's calendar? A reminder to torment someone. Worse, Hartwell, urgent, underlined twice, and dated exactly a week before the gala. Agatha felt a jolt. Saskia had planned an urgent meeting with Julian Hartwell, or someone linked to him. Why didn't Lila mention that, she asked. Because Lila is too busy plotting revenge on humidity, Roy sniffed. Now what does it mean? Agatha didn't answer at once. The drizzle outside had eased to a soft grey haze. She looked down the lane, thinking. Julian's scandal had destroyed him, yes. But Saskia reopening the file, contacting him, planning an exposé. Someone had panicked. Someone afraid of Saskia digging too deeply. "It means," Agatha said slowly, "that Saskia found something worth killing for." Roy gulped audibly. "Darling, don't say things like that before lunch." They hung up. Agatha stood in her kitchen, adrenaline stirring beneath her skin. Mystery pressed from all sides. Colin's bravado, Lila's jealousy, Julian's ghostly presence, Saskia's cryptic calendar note. Someone feared Saskia and Julian reconnecting. Someone terrified of what they might uncover. She had barely begun to process this when her answering machine clicked loudly, the old beige box on the side table blinking an insistent red light. Hodge turned his head, ears pricked. Agatha pressed the button. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker, mechanical, warped, unmistakably threatening. "Stop digging! You don't want the past uncovered." A soft click, then silence. Agatha stood very still. The cottage seemed to tighten around her. Even Hodge froze, tail stiff. She swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Well," she said to the empty room, "that's not ominous at all." Hodge blinked up at her, unimpressed by human danger but alert to her trembling. Agatha stroked his back, her fingers shaking slightly. "If they think that warning will stop me," she muttered, voice hardening, "then they've never met Agatha Raisin." But even as she said it, a chill threaded through her. Someone wanted her frightened, and it was working, just a little. Storm clouds rolled over Carsely that afternoon, bruised and heavy, gathering above the village with an air of theatrical menace. Agatha Raisin matched them perfectly. She marched up the gravel drive of Charles Frayth's manor with the fury of a woman who'd decided she had precisely no patience left. Not for killers, not for ex-husbands, and certainly not for aristocrats with guilty eyes and expensive cologne. Charles opened the door before she could ring, as if he'd been braced for impact. "Agatha, darling," he began, voice dripping charm, "I had a feeling you'd arrive in a weather system." "Oh, shut up," Agatha snapped, pushing past him into the entrance hall. "You've been lying. Start talking." Charles blinked owlishly. "Is this about the goose?" "What goose?" Agatha demanded, momentarily thrown. "Never mind," Charles muttered. "Tea?" "No tea, confess." Charles sighed dramatically and gestured toward the drawing room. Agatha followed, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Hodge would have been proud of the posture. Rain tapped against the mullioned windows as though trying to underline her mood. Charles sank into an armchair with the grace of a man making peace with his execution. "Fine," he said. "You win. I did visit Saskia after the gala." Agatha leaned forward. "When?" "Later that night, after your dramatic exit with Bill and the ambulance." He waved a hand. "I received a fax at the manor, a very cryptic fax. Said Saskia had information that might amuse me. Naturally, I was intrigued." "Curiosity killed the cat," Agatha snapped, "and occasionally the aristocrat. What did she want?" "I never got to ask," he said, sighing. When I arrived, her flat was empty. I found her desk open and a metal file box on the floor, so I took it. Agatha gaped. You stole evidence? I removed a potential embarrassment, Charles corrected primly. Saskia and I had a brief flirtation once, years ago. We were both at some ghastly London event involving heiresses and rowing teams. Agatha snapped her fingers. The goose. Charles flushed. If you must know, I tried to assist a very drunk heiress during a charity boat race. A goose became involved. Saskia threatened to blackmail me with it for years. He shuddered. She said it would make marvellous tabloid fodder. Agatha stared at him, torn between hysterical laughter and strangling him. How on earth does a goose become involved in a boat race? I don't discuss that incident sober, Charles said. Point is, Saskia had photographs, or at least claimed she did. So you panicked, Agatha surmised, and stole the metal box to protect your ego. You say ego, I say dignity. And what did you do with the box? Charles shrugged. Threw it in a cupboard. It was mostly empty. But I didn't poison anyone. Honestly, Agatha, I'm far too lazy for murder. She paced the room, hands clenching at her sides. You realize this makes you look suspicious. Charles picked up a biscuit with aristocratic serenity. Most things make me look suspicious. Comes with having cheekbones. Agatha ignored this. The storm outside deepened, thunder murmuring like distant disapproval. Did the facts show a number? She asked. No, anonymous. Charles grimaced. It felt malicious, as if someone wanted me tangled in Saskia's final mess. Or someone wanted me chasing you instead of the truth, Agatha muttered. Charles tilted his head. You think the clipping you received, the red ink around your scandal, was meant to distract you? Yes, Agatha said, excitement flickering beneath her irritation. I thought someone wanted to expose my past. But what if they don't care about my scandal at all? What if pulling me off the real trail was the point? Charles tapped his fingers. Saskia always kept duplicates of everything, he added casually. If the metal box was empty, she had copies elsewhere. Secret drawers, hidden files. Agatha's eyes widened. Duplicates? In her office? Yes. She once told me she didn't trust storage systems, said filing cabinets were for the uninspired. Agatha felt electricity run through her nerves. If Saskia kept duplicates, then someone else had removed them from the office. Her London visit, the shadow on the stairwell, returned to her mind with sharp clarity. Someone emptied that drawer, she said. Not you, not Lila. Someone who didn't want Saskia's research found. Which suggests, Charles said slowly, that whatever Saskia was about to reveal at the gala had nothing to do with your scandal, and everything to do with someone else's. Agatha stopped pacing. The truth hovered at the edge of her thoughts, clearer now, more dangerous. Someone wants me distracted, she said, chasing geese and memories instead of the murder. Geese again, Charles sighed. Must everything lead back to that incident? Agatha rounded on him. This is serious. Someone is playing a game. Then let's play back, Charles said mildly. Just not in the rain. I hate getting damp. She glared at him, but couldn't suppress a reluctant flicker of fondness. He was infuriating, but loyal, and his ridiculous goose scandal, while entirely irrelevant, had at least lifted her gloom for a moment. Fine, she said. But we go to Mrs. Blocksby first. She always sees through nonsense. Charles raised an eyebrow. Does she see through you? All the time, Agatha admitted. They drove to the vicarage as the storm pressed lower, clouds sagging like a wet curtain. Mrs. Blocksby greeted them with warm light and the scent of fresh tea, her calm presence instantly soothing. Agatha felt her shoulders drop as she entered the cosy kitchen. You look troubled, Mrs. Blocksby said, or both of you do. Agatha explained everything, Charles's late-night visit, the facts, the empty file box, and the dawning suspicion that her scandal wasn't the true target. Mrs. Blocksby listened thoughtfully, stirring a pot of vegetable soup with gentle motions. Sometimes, she said softly, a person hides their own past not to protect themselves, but to reshape someone else's future. Agatha blinked. Meaning? Perhaps the killer wasn't afraid of old sins, Mrs. Blocksby said. Perhaps they feared what Saskia was about to uncover, something that would change their life, reputation, or plans. Agatha felt the idea settle heavily into place. Someone wanted Saskia quiet, not because of me, but because of someone else. Charles sipped his tea. And that someone went through great trouble to nudge suspicion toward old scandals. Agatha straightened. So the clipping wasn't a threat. It was a trick. Mrs. Bloxby nodded. A distraction. Agatha felt a ripple of triumph. For days she'd been consumed with shame and anxiety. Now she saw the cleverness in the misdirection and the malice. Someone wanted me frightened, she said, too frightened to notice what Saskia was digging up. And what that might mean, Mrs. Bloxby added gently. Agatha leaned back, her mind racing. Saskia had been researching Julian Hartwell. Her calendar marked Hartwell urgent. Someone had followed Agatha in the stairwell. Someone had removed Saskia's duplicate files. Someone had sent the clipping. Someone who feared the truth. This is bigger than me, Agatha whispered. Isn't it? Everything is bigger than you, Charles said pleasantly. You're only 5'5". Agatha kicked him under the table. Mrs. Bloxby pretended not to notice. They left the vicarage as the storm finally broke, heavy drops splattering the lane, washing the last of Carsely's gossip into the gutters. Thunder rolled across the rooftops. Agatha reached her cottage door when the telephone began ringing inside, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the rain. She lunged for it, breathless. The answering machine clicked first. A distorted voice oozed through the speaker, warped and metallic. It was warned. Now she's gone. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Agatha stared at the machine, frozen. The rain lashed the windows, Hodge arched his back, and the room felt colder. She pressed a hand to her chest. Gone, she whispered. The phone line clicked, dead. 10 minutes later, Bill Wong phoned with confirmation. Saskia Trent was dead. Poisoning confirmed. Murder. Official at last. Agatha stood in the middle of her cottage, storm raging outside, and whispered, They killed her, and they think they can frighten me. Hodge rubbed gently against her leg, as though reminding her that fear didn't suit her. Agatha took a steadying breath. Well, she murmured, they'll regret underestimating Agatha Raisin. But her voice betrayed a tremor, just enough to show she understood the danger now. Not imaginary, not old, very real. A tense frost lay over Carsely the next morning, the sort that turned hedges brittle and left the air sharp enough to sting the nose. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen window, staring out at the stillness. Even the village gossip seemed subdued, as though the frost had sealed every mouth temporarily. Word had spread quickly. Saskia Trent was dead. Not collapsed, not hospitalized. Dead. Poisoned. Agatha felt a cold knot settle under her ribs. She had been in shouting distance of Saskia's last moments, tangled in the gala, the investigation, the faxes, and the revived scandal. She wasn't responsible, but guilt had a way of creeping in through the cracks regardless. Hodge sat on the windowsill beside her, a warm, solid presence. He nudged her hand with his head, a surprisingly tender gesture for a cat who typically behaved like a slightly superior roommate. Agatha stroked him absent-mindedly. I didn't want her dead, she murmured. Annoyed, humiliated, maybe mildly cursed, but not dead. Hodge blinked and shifted, unimpressed by human confliction but accepting of her need to fuss. After forcing down a cup of tea she didn't really taste, Agatha grabbed her coat and marched out into the frosty lane. She had one plan and no patience. Julian Hartwell had answers, and she was going to extract them. Julian looked worse than the last time she'd seen him. Pale, twitchy, wearing a coat that had the air of a man who had lived too many hard years inside it. He stood outside the Mercester Station Cafe, hands jammed deep into his pockets. She's dead, Julian said, before Agatha could speak. His voice cracked on the last word. I know. Agatha met his eyes. You need to tell me everything. No theatrics, no mystery. Julian flinched and nodded. Saskia came to me weeks ago. She said she had found something. Something about my past. Agatha stiffened. My scandal? No. Julian rubbed his forehead. Saskia said she'd discovered why my career collapsed so completely. It wasn't your stunt, Agatha. It was my manager, Lila Moorcroft. Agatha blinked. Lila? She embezzled my funds, Julian said, nearly all of them. When I started to question the discrepancies, she used your scandal to distract from it. Told everyone I'd become unhinged. Managed the press narrative. She let me crash so thoroughly that I disappeared. It ruined me, and she walked away clean. Agatha inhaled sharply. Lila, with her bitter eyes and stiff hair bun, a woman who had forged threatening faxes to regain Saskia's attention, and now appeared tied to something far darker. "Saskia found proof?" Agatha asked. "Yes." Julian's voice dropped. "She found old documents, medical records, transactions. Lila had stolen money and buried evidence. Saskia said she'd present it at the gala. A redemption story with teeth, she called it." Agatha swallowed hard. This wasn't about her old humiliation at all. Saskia had been hunting bigger prey. "Lila had access to your files," Agatha said slowly, "including the substances used in your old clubbing days." Julian nodded, shame flickering across his tired face. Some of those were dangerous, a few rare. She would have known. A clue. A real one. But not yet enough. "But Lila wouldn't kill," Julian insisted. "She's desperate, not violent." Agatha wasn't so sure. Desperate people often surprise themselves. Before she could ponder further, a familiar voice boomed across the car park. "Agatha Raisin!" Colin Trent stormed toward them, scarf askew, looking like a man who had spent the night rehearsing his outrage in front of a mirror. "Saskia ruined my life," he shouted. "Do you hear me? Ruined it! And now she's dead, and the police will see—" "Will see what?" Agatha asked coolly. "That I wanted justice," Colin declared dramatically, "and that I knew things, important things, the world needed to hear." Agatha folded her arms. "What things?" Colin floundered, then lifted his chin defiantly. "You'll find out, eventually, when my lawyer advises—" "Spare us," Agatha interrupted. "You've no timeline, no motive beyond whining, and absolutely no facts. Go home." Colin puffed up like an indignant rooster, but eventually stalked away with a flourish that would have been more impressive if he hadn't tripped over a frozen puddle. Red herring, Agatha thought. Loud, ridiculous, and utterly useless. The London office felt different this time, tense, brittle, as if Saskia's death had sucked all the polish from the place. Lila Moorcroft sat at her desk, eyes rimmed red, hands trembling. "You think I killed her?" Lila whispered as soon as Agatha approached. "I think you hid things," Agatha said, voice firm. "I think you forged faxes. I think you stalked her. But did you poison her?" Lila shook her head violently. "I loved her. I hated her too, but I didn't kill her, I swear. She was cruel to me, yes, but she was brilliant. I wanted her approval, not her death." Agatha studied her. Lila looked fragile, hollowed out. A woman capable of manipulation, even emotional cruelty, but not murder. Terrified, yes. Dangerous, possibly. But murderous? No. "I believe you," Agatha said softly. Lila choked back a sob. "She found something huge, something about an investor, a fraud scheme. She said someone would be ruined if she released it. Fraud, money, reputation. Now the pieces moved with sharper clarity. Agatha left the office with Roy and Charles, her thoughts racing. She had been so fixated on her own scandal she'd failed to see the larger web. Saskia's exposé had nothing to do with her. Someone else had been threatened, someone with much more to lose. "So," Roy said, breath fogging the cold air, "this investor, could they be our killer?" "Could be," Charles said. "But where's the proof?" "Hidden," Agatha said, pacing. "Maybe in that metal box, maybe in duplicate files. But someone stole everything before we got there." Roy frowned. "You think someone's tampered with Charles's boot?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Agatha muttered. Charles rolled his eyes. "You see crime everywhere." "And I'm usually right," Agatha snapped. When they reached Charles's manor, Agatha insisted they check the boot immediately. Charles protested, but she steamrolled him, as usual. He fetched the keys with aristocratic martyrdom. The boot clicked open. Agatha froze. There, beneath a tartan blanket and an old tennis racket, sat the missing metal box. Roy gasped. "Darling, that was not there before." Charles staggered slightly. "I swear I didn't touch it." Agatha's pulse hammered. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Someone who wanted the box found, but altered. She lifted the lid. Empty, except for one sheet. A fax printout. A London bank statement. A blacked-out name. "They removed everything else," Agatha whispered. Charles leaned in. "That's not my black pen. Far too aggressive." Agatha stared at the redacted name. Her stomach dropped. She knew that shape, that length, that spacing, the faint outline beneath the black ink. Colin Trent, Saskia's ex-husband. "Oh," Roy breathed. "Oh, that's not glamorous." Agatha swallowed hard. Suddenly everything clicked. Colin Trent, furious, self-important, financially ruined. Colin, the loudest voice claiming victimhood. Colin, who'd shouted about justice, threatened revelations, and insisted Saskia destroyed him. Colin, whose finances were questionable. Colin, whose fraud might ruin him. Colin, whose timeline couldn't fit, except now it did. Saskia hadn't intended to expose Agatha. She'd intended to expose Colin Trent. Agatha straightened, breath misting in the cold air. "He killed her," she whispered. "He poisoned her. He stole the files. And he tried to frame me with that clipping." Charles swore softly. Roy looked faintly ill. Agatha closed the metal box with shaking hands. The frost had deepened now, turning Charles's drive into a glittering sheet of silver. Hodge's face flashed in her mind, warm, steady, grounding her. "We have to tell Bill," she said. But even as she spoke, something darker threaded through her. Colin Trent wouldn't run. He'd fight, and he would be dangerous. She lifted the box, squared her shoulders, and said, "This ends with him." Her voice carried a cold certainty, sharper than frost, steadier than fear. And as they stepped back into Charles's house, Agatha realized the truth. The lie that sparked this whole murder wasn't hers. It belonged to the man who now had the most to lose, and the least to fear from killing again. The morning after Agatha's realization dawned bleakly. A pale London light filtered through low clouds like an exhausted apology. She stood outside Charles's manor, coat pulled tight, metal box in hand, frost nibbling at her fingers. Charles and Roy hovered nearby, Charles elegant and irritated, Roy fluttery and over-perfumed. "Right," Agatha said, breath forming clouds. "We're going to London." Roy blinked dramatically. "Darling, it's barely 9. The city isn't even awake yet." "Colin Trent is," Agatha said grimly. "And if we wait, he'll vanish." Charles gave a little nod. "He always struck me as the type who packs quickly. Too many expensive scarves." Agatha gestured toward his car. "Get in, and no arguing." Charles sighed with aristocratic resignation. "Very well. But if the Metropolitan Police want my fingerprints, I'm leaving." "You won't be touching anything," Agatha snapped. "Just standing there looking ornamental." "My best quality," Charles murmured. The drive to London was long, grey, and punctuated by Roy's anxious commentary about the dangers of criminals hiding behind potted plants. Agatha ignored him, eyes fixed on the road. Her thoughts churned. Saskia's exposé, Colin's redacted bank statement, the stolen files, and the simple, vicious truth beneath it all. Colin Trent had been hiding fraud, real fraud. Not the puffed-up theatrics he performed in public, but years-old embezzlement threaded through Saskia's old PR connections. She knew. She had proof, and she had intended to reveal it. Agatha clenched the steering wheel. She'd wasted days chasing the wrong secret, her scandal, her shame. Someone had played her like a fiddle, and she was furious. London throbbed with late-morning traffic as they entered Collins Street, an untidy row of rented flats with peeling paint and hopeful hanging baskets. Agatha marched up the narrow path like a woman storming a fortress. "Stay behind me," she said. "Gladly," Roy whispered. Before she could knock, a rustling noise came from inside, frantic, sharp, paper shredding, something crashing. Agatha exchanged a look with Charles. Then she kicked the door. It flew open with surprising ease, crashing into the wall and setting off a chain reaction. A lamp toppled, a stack of newspapers slithered across the floor, and Colin Trent jolted upright from behind an overflowing shredder, face white as chalk dust. "You!" he squeaked. Agatha planted her hands on her hips. "Trying to redecorate, are we?" Colin scrambled backward, tripping over a suitcase half-packed with shirts that had never been fashionable. "Leave me alone. I have nothing to say." "You have everything to say," Agatha retorted. Roy, attempting to look brave, moved to block the kitchen door. Unfortunately, in doing so, he knocked over a potted fern which bounced off the counter and hit Colin directly on the shoulder. "Ow!" Colin yelped. "Sorry," Roy squeaked. "Self-defense?" "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha muttered. She lunged forward and grabbed Colin by the jacket collar, hauling him into the lounge. Charles followed, leaning against the doorframe with weary elegance. "Start talking," Agatha said. "Now." Colin trembled violently. "I know nothing." Agatha held up the blacked-out bank statement. "Then explain why this was in Saskia's files. Explain why the metal box was emptied. Explain why Saskia wrote an exposé about someone burying their secret, and it wasn't me." Colin's face flickered. A guilty twitch, a tremor, then crumbled. "She was going to ruin me," he whispered. Agatha stepped closer, voice sharp. "What did Saskia find?" Colin slumped onto the sagging sofa. "She found everything." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Charming. Could you be more specific?" Colin rubbed his face. His voice dropped to a hoarse murmur. "Years ago, when Saskia and I were still involved, I got into trouble. Money trouble. I'd invested in a failing venture. I panicked. I shifted funds from her clients' accounts. She never proved it at the time, but she suspected." "Fraud," Agatha said flatly. Colin nodded. "She kept digging, through old accounts, client files, forgotten ledgers, and last month she found the paper trail, the transfers, the shell account." Agatha's jaw tightened. She planned to announce the fraud at the gala. "Yes." Colin's breath shuddered. "She told me, said it was her moment of professional justice. She always loved drama." Agatha felt a hollow ache. Saskia had died believing in that drama. "So, you killed her," Agatha whispered. Colin swallowed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "I followed her that night. She was laughing with someone backstage. She set down her champagne, just for a moment." "I got the stuff from an old club contact," Colin whispered. He still had a stash from the 90s scene. "I told him it was for a party trick. I thought she'd only fall ill. I didn't think—" Agatha's stomach turned. "You slipped the poison into her glass," she said. He nodded, tears streaking down his cheeks. I thought she'd feel ill. Step away. Cancel the announcement. I didn't mean—" "Poison doesn't negotiate," Agatha snapped. Colin's guilt spilled out in choked fragments. He had panicked after Saskia collapsed, rushed to her flat, shredded documents, stole files. He had even slipped the metal box into Charles's boot while they were distracted at the gala, a convenient frame job for anyone who knew Charles's chaotic past. "And the tabloid clipping?" Agatha asked coldly. Colin wiped his nose. "I knew your scandal would distract you, and the police, and everyone. Saskia always said you were predictable that way." Agatha flinched. The truth stung. Her pride had been weaponized. Charles gave a low whistle. "You killed for this?" He gestured at the piles of shredded paper. "Your returns are pathetic, Trent. Couldn't you choose a more lucrative crime?" "Charles!" Agatha snapped. "What?" he protested. "It's a tragic waste of effort." Before Agatha could retort, heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Bill Wong burst in. A tall, plainclothes officer with a Metropolitan Police badge followed Bill in, giving a curt nod. "Joint operation," Bill said shortly. "London wanted someone who already understands Agatha." Flanked by two uniformed officers, fury radiating from every line of his face. "Agatha," he said, exasperation overflowing. "You were supposed to call me before confronting the suspect." Colin froze. Roy hid behind the damaged fern. Charles adopted a pose of total innocence. "I was going to call," Agatha insisted, "after he confessed." Bill pinched the bridge of his nose. "Did he confess?" Charles gestured elegantly, like a man with no legal training whatsoever. Bill sighed. "Colin Trent, you are under arrest for the murder of Saskia Trent. You do not have to say anything." Colin wailed as the officers took him. Roy swooned against the armchair, and Charles muttered something about needing a drink, though Agatha wasn't sure he meant alcohol. As Colin was dragged out, Agatha stared after him. The reality of the solution settled over her like a dense fog, not triumphant, not relieving, just heavy. When the officers left with Colin, Bill turned to Agatha. "You should have waited," he said. "You'd have missed his confession," Agatha replied quietly. Bill softened. "You did well, even if you did it badly." Agatha gave a thin smile. Then she hesitated. "Bill," she said, voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Bill paused, sensing the shift in her tone. "Go on." Agatha inhaled, the metal box still in her hand, its weight suddenly symbolic. "I've been running from my own scandal for years," she said. "It wasn't murder. But I did ruin someone's life, not on purpose, but it happened. and I never made it right. Bill studied her for a long, quiet moment. Everyone has mistakes, he said gently. Some bigger than others. This one was big, Agatha whispered. I buried it, and someone dug it up again. But it wasn't the reason Saskia died, Bill said, and it doesn't make you a killer. Agatha nodded, though she didn't fully believe him. Bill reached out, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. You chase the truth. You always do. Even when it hurts, Agatha murmured. Especially then, Bill replied. The flat felt unbearably still around them. Scattered papers, the overturned fern, the stale air of deceit. Agatha walked to the window. Outside, the London winter pressed against the glass, grey and unblinking. She had solved Saskia's murder, yes, but the price was steep. A fresh crack in her protective armour. An old guilt resurfaced, a past she could no longer ignore. Thank you, she said to Bill, surprising herself. For what? Bill asked. For being decent, she said, in a world where far too many people aren't. Bill smiled faintly. Someone has to balance you out. Agatha glared, but her heart softened. Come on, Bill said gently. Let's get you back to Carsely. Agatha allowed herself one last look around the flat. The truth in black ink had finally surfaced. Saskia had died for it. Colin would answer for it. And Agatha, inconveniently human and painfully honest, would carry her own truth a little closer now. As she stepped outside, cold air hit her cheeks. She shivered, not entirely from the weather. Let's go home, she murmured. Hodge would be waiting, and maybe, for tonight, that was enough. A pale winter sun stretched across Carsely the next morning, thin as watered milk, but determined enough to touch the rooftops with a faint glow. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, staring at the rim of her tea mug with the intensity of a gladiator awaiting battle. Hodge lounged on the chair beside her, tail swishing like a metronome of judgment. She'd slept badly. Too many thoughts churned. Saskia's death, Colin's arrest, Julian's trembling confession, and her own secret dragged back into the light like an old corpse with bad timing. Bill Wong had been gentle with her last night. Too gentle. It made her uneasy. A knock sounded at the door. Bill again. Agatha opened the door before he could knock twice. If you're here to lecture me, save it. I'm not in the mood. I didn't come to lecture, Bill said calmly. I came to nudge. I don't need nudging. You need something, Bill said, stepping inside. He examined her face gently, the way one might examine a wounded bird determined to bite. Julian asked about you. Also, Lila Moorcroft is being charged for the forged faxes and for creative bookkeeping, Bill added. She's not walking away from this. Agatha stiffened. I don't want to see him. You should, Bill said. You solved the case, but you haven't solved you. Agatha scowled. I am not an unsolved mystery. You are, Bill said, smiling faintly, and a complicated one. She nearly retorted, but the words caught in her throat. She hated that he could see through her armour, hated it almost as much as she appreciated it. Bill slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Go to London. Talk to Julian properly. Hear the truth without fear behind it. I don't fear anything, Agatha snapped, except aging, failure, loneliness, romantic disappointment. Get out, Bill grinned. See? You're already improving. Against her better judgment, Agatha laughed, a short, grudging burst. Fine, she said. I'll go, but only because I want to, not because anyone nudged. Of course, Bill said. Your independence is legendary. Out, Agatha repeated, pointing to the door. He obeyed, laughing all the way back to his car. Agatha shut the door and leaned against it. Hodge jumped onto her lap with the confidence of a creature who understood ownership on a spiritual level. Don't look at me like that, she muttered. It's only a conversation, not penance. But it felt like penance, and she'd been avoiding it for too many years. Julian Hartwell chose to meet in a quiet London cafe tucked behind a bookshop, a place smelling faintly of ink and baked sugar. Agatha arrived early, much to her own surprise, and sat near the window. London looked different now, polished, chic, smug. Everything had a price, and none of it felt reasonable. Julian entered moments later. He looked better, calmer, steadier, as though Saskia's death had forced some brittle shell inside him to crack open. Agatha, he said, sitting opposite her. Julian, she replied stiffly. Let's get this over with. He gave a tired, kind smile, still dramatic. Still a failure, she muttered before she could stop herself. Julian blinked. Not you. Agatha cleared her throat. Let's be honest. I ruined your life. No, Julian said firmly. My pride ruined my life. Agatha stared at him, caught off guard. Julian folded his hands. Yes, your PR stunt embarrassed me. Yes, it damaged my image. But it didn't destroy me. I destroyed myself by retreating, by sulking, by nursing resentment instead of fighting back. Agatha frowned. You blamed me for years. I did, he sighed. It was easier to blame you than face that I'd been robbed, mismanaged, and manipulated. Lila stole my money. Saskia exposed my weaknesses. But you only exposed my pride. Agatha looked down at her tea. Her throat felt oddly tight. I've carried that guilt for years. I thought I'd ruined someone decent. Julian reached across the table and touched her hand lightly. You didn't ruin me. You bruised me. And bruises fade. Agatha pulled her hand back, embarrassed. I don't do emotional scenes. You just lived one. Well, I didn't enjoy it, she said sharply. Julian laughed softly. You're the same, Agatha, fierce and terrified at the same time. Agatha bristled. I'm not terrified of anything. You are, Julian said, but you keep walking anyway. That's courage. She swallowed hard. Compliments never sat well on her. They felt like clothes in the wrong size. Saskia exploited both of us, Julian continued, manipulated our egos, dug her claws into old wounds. She knew exactly where to press, but she wasn't your enemy. Not really. She died trying to expose Colin, Agatha said quietly. Julian nodded. She made bad choices, but she tried to do something good at the end. Agatha looked out the cafe window. London shoppers hurried past with wide scarves and expensive coffees. Everything had changed, except her memory of it. I always thought everyone remembered my scandal, she murmured, like a shadow following me. Julian's smile was gentle. No one remembers. The world forgets faster than we do. A long silence followed, not uncomfortable, simply full. Agatha finally stood, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Thank you, she said. Julian rose as well. For what? For letting me off the hook, she said, even if I don't deserve it. We both deserved better than Saskia, Julian said softly. Now we get to decide what comes next. Agatha nodded once, brusque. Well, goodbye. Goodbye, Agatha. She walked out before she could change her mind. London irritated her almost immediately. The trendy queues outside coffee shops, the absurd price of almond croissants, the young people wearing clothes that looked deliberately unfinished. She marched down an overpriced lane, spotted a grimy red phone box and stepped inside. The handset smelled faintly of damp cardboard. She jabbed at the sticky keypad and dialed Charles. What now? Charles answered lazily. Have you seen what coffee costs in London these days? Is that why you called? He asked, amused. It's daylight robbery. I refuse to pay £4 for something that tastes like burnt wallpaper. Charles chuckled. You're adorable when you're outraged. I am not adorable, Agatha snapped. I am incensed. Buy tea instead. I hate the tea here. It tastes like regret. Come home, Charles said warmly. Carsely suits you. Agatha felt a surprising warmth spread in her chest. Perhaps it does. Back in Carsely, the village hummed with a different energy. Saskia's murder had shocked them, but word of Agatha solving it, somewhat sort of loudly, had spread like jam on warm scones. Mrs. Bloxby visited first. She arrived with a gentle smile and a tin of ginger biscuits. You look lighter, Mrs. Bloxby said, settling at the table. Do I? Agatha asked suspiciously. You confronted something important. Agatha snorted. It was only a conversation. With yourself, Mrs. Bloxby added. Agatha bristled but didn't argue. Hodge leapt onto the table and inspected the biscuit tin like a customs officer. Burying a secret never erases it, Mrs. Bloxby said warmly, but facing it frees you from it. Agatha sighed, not dramatically, but with a quiet, tired release. I suppose you're right, Mrs. Bloxby smiled. You did well, Agatha Raisin. Everyone keeps saying that, Agatha muttered. It's unsettling. Get used to it, Mrs. Bloxby said. Then she patted her hand and left, trailing warmth behind her. Moments later came Doris Simpson, bustling in uninvited with a Tupperware box. "Biscuits," Doris declared, "for our Agatha, celebrity detective of Carsely." Agatha nearly choked. "Celebrity what?" "Detective," Doris said proudly. "We all agree. Even Mrs. Josephs, and she doesn't agree with anyone." Agatha felt her cheeks heat. Embarrassment mingled with pleasure, though she'd never admit it. "Thank you," she muttered. "Well, you solved a proper murder, didn't you?" Doris said. "Not one of those boring ones with accountants." "Murder is never boring," Agatha snapped, but Doris only waved and departed, leaving crumbs of affection behind her. "If one more person calls me our Agatha, I swear I'll emigrate," she muttered. Agatha stood in the kitchen, staring at the biscuits, feeling something warm and unsettling expand in her chest. Acceptance, perhaps, or belonging. She wasn't sure she liked it. Evening arrived with a soft, Carsely hush, chimneys smoking, light pooling in cottage windows, the sound of distant laughter from the Red Lion. Agatha poured 2 glasses of wine, berating herself for the sentiment. Charles arrived exactly 1 minute late, looking pleased with himself. "You look almost peaceful," he said, stepping in. "Don't start," Agatha muttered, handing him a glass. They settled in the sitting room, fire crackling, atmosphere warm enough to melt even Agatha's defences. "So," Charles said, "did London survive you?" "Barely," he chuckled. "And Julian?" "Alive," Agatha said, annoyingly perceptive, utterly forgiving, disgusting. Charles raised his glass. "To survival." Agatha clinked his glass reluctantly. "To being misunderstood." "To being impossible," Charles added. She smirked. "To being right." He laughed, soft and amused, and Agatha felt an odd flutter. Not romance, not exactly, but companionship, with edges softened by firelight. Just then, Hodge leapt onto her lap, demanding attention with a heavy paw squarely on her wineglass. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha groaned as wine splashed onto her skirt. Charles burst into laughter. Agatha stroked Hodge despite herself. "He has impeccable timing, always ruins the moment." "Or perfect timing," Charles said gently. Agatha paused, only for a heartbeat, and allowed a small, genuine smile. "Maybe," she said, and for once she didn't correct him. Carsely drifted into evening with the easy confidence of a village that had seen absolutely everything but preferred not to mention any of it. Warm light glowed behind cottage curtains, and thin curls of chimney smoke rose lazily into the clear sky. The air carried a faint chill, enough to make noses pink, but not enough to threaten frost. It was, Agatha grudgingly admitted, peaceful. She stood in her sitting room, hands on hips, surveying the last untidy pile of paperwork from the London ordeal. Shredded notes, faxes, old press clippings, her past in unflattering collage form. She'd been avoiding this tidy-up for days. Hodge leapt onto the table and inspected the nearest paper with disdain. He seemed to determine it wasn't edible, meaningful, or interesting, and proceeded to sit on it. "Yes, thank you," Agatha muttered. "Your contribution is noted." Hodge blinked, which was cat for your welcome. With a sigh, Agatha began stacking the papers. The past was still uncomfortable, but it no longer clung to her like an old, wet coat. Julian's forgiveness had settled her more than she wanted to admit. And Saskia, well, Saskia had been a storm, brief, destructive, and oddly cleansing. Agatha wasn't ready to forgive her, but she could understand her now. And that, she supposed, was progress. She paused over Saskia's name on a photocopied header and felt a brief, reluctant pang. Trust Saskia Trent. Even her redemption had looked like a performance. She fed Hodge, who pretended he hadn't been waiting, though his bowl had been empty for precisely 3 minutes, then stepped back and surveyed her tidy sitting room. A holiday, she mused aloud. Somewhere quiet, somewhere civilized, somewhere without secrets. Hodge sneezed as if laughing. "Fine," Agatha grumbled. "You're probably right. Disaster follows me like that awful WI lemon drizzle I once attempted." Before the memory could sour her mood further, a knock sounded. Bill Wong stood at the door, hands jammed in his coat pockets, wearing his usual blend of patience and amusement. "Thought I'd check in," Bill said. "See how you're coping now that the excitement's over." "Excitement?" Agatha sniffed. "It was exhausting, and you're only here for gossip." Bill grinned. Julian asked me to thank you. Agatha stiffened. For what? For giving him his life back, Bill said simply. He's talking to an agent again. Says he wants to try small gigs first. He's even writing new material. Agatha crossed her arms. Good for him, then. Bill watched her. You care? I do not, she snapped too quickly. Bill smiled. Carsely is proud of you. Oh, don't start, Agatha muttered. It's embarrassing enough with Doris bringing biscuits every 5 minutes. Bill stepped inside. Everyone needs a victory lap sometimes. Victory implies competence, Agatha said. I mainly survived. Survival is an achievement, Bill replied gently. Especially for you. Get out, she said, though her voice lacked heat. He chuckled and left, offering a small wave as he walked down the lane. Agatha watched him go, a surprising warmth settling in her chest. She didn't trust it. Emotional softness was dangerous, like wearing heels on cobblestones. Moments later, Mrs. Bloxby arrived with her usual quiet grace, carrying a basket covered with a linen cloth. I brought a few things, Mrs. Bloxby said. Thought you might enjoy them now that all the unpleasantness is over. Agatha lifted the cloth. Scones. Warm scones. She nearly cried. You spoil me, she said. Mrs. Bloxby smiled. I only encourage you. They sat together at the little kitchen table, Hodge curling beneath Agatha's chair like a furry guardian. The vicar's wife poured tea with gentle precision. You look lighter, she said. I've been told that, Agatha replied, annoyingly frequently. That's because you are. You confronted something you've avoided for a long time. Agatha poked at a scone. I still don't like talking about it. You don't need to, Mrs. Bloxby said. You only needed to face it. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. Agatha sighed, not dramatically, but with a certain surrender. You always make things sound neat and tidy. No, Mrs. Bloxby said softly. I just remind you that you're stronger than you think. Agatha looked down, embarrassed by kindness. She changed the subject quickly, but Mrs. Bloxby stayed a little longer, sharing warm silences and gentle humour. When she left, Agatha stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the older woman disappear into the soft Cotswold dusk. Ridiculous woman, Agatha muttered affectionately. Back inside, the cottage hummed with quiet comfort. The fire crackled. The curtains framed the deepening twilight. Hodge stretched luxuriously on the sofa, displaying the full arrogance of a creature who believed he held the deeds to the property. Agatha poured herself a glass of wine and settled into her favourite chair. She lifted the cigarette tin from the side table, hesitated, then opened it. Reflective purposes only, she told Hodge. He flicked an ear, unimpressed. Agatha lit one cigarette, just one, letting the curl of smoke drift upward in lazy spirals. It wasn't about addiction tonight. It was about contemplation, a rare moment of peace after weeks of chaos. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the warmth of the fire, the weight of Hodge against her leg, the familiar scent of wool, wood smoke, and a life rebuilt more times than she'd ever admit. Just as she began to relax, the telephone rang. Agatha groaned. If that's the WI asking for another lemon drizzle attempt, she answered. Charles's voice purred down the line. Agatha, darling, would you care to join me for a country weekend? Just the two of us. Fresh air, nice food, minimal geese. Agatha rolled her eyes, though a smile tugged at her mouth. Is this a trap? Only if you want it to be. Fine, she said. But if this one ends with a body, I'm done. From the sofa, Hodge stretched languidly, tail flicking, as if announcing that she was lying. Agatha noticed and scowled. Don't contradict me. Then she laughed, quietly, reluctantly, sincerely, and let the evening settle around her like a warm blanket. Whatever came next, she would face it, with wine, with irritation, with courage, and with Hodge, of course, supervising every foolish step.